Welcome to Fix and Fly, the business podcast, which identifies common business issues for you to watch out for in your day-to-day business life. So tune in every fortnight where we speak to leaders of corporates to SMEs where you can implement their strategies into your business. I'm your host, Larissa Logan from Fixity, where we help turn businesses around. Welcome, Lynne, to the Fix and Fly podcast.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So today I wanted to have a chat with you around what we're seeing in the market. So before we get into that, do you mind sharing with our audience the top 3 things we need to know about you?
So I'm a lawyer. My family background is in business, how they operate, how to manage them, and as a lawyer, working with them to find a way to turn them around.
And so from what I can see in the work that I do, I know that I'm busy, and so you must be extremely busy given the current economic conditions.
Yeah, the legal profession at the moment is seeing a real influx in dispute work. I think when finances get tight, it can bring out the worst in people. It just puts the pressure on everyone, and so we're seeing a lot of shareholder disputes, relationship property issues, and just general litigation. People are desperate, I think, to get money wherever they can, and often that is looking at their own businesses and what they can recover. So we are finding that they are more likely to take steps to recover money where they need to.
And I think we saw that leading up to the GFC, kind of a number of kind of shareholder disputes going on. Are there some common themes that you're seeing that you could actually share with the audience that would allow these business owners to set their business up for success?
I think a lot of small and mid-sized businesses in New Zealand learned some really hard lessons during the GFC. Businesses were sort of coming off the back of a economic cycle where they could be slightly more relaxed about their books, and we had a lot of clients who didn't really understand things like the Personal Property Securities Act, what they could do to ensure that they were protected. And a lot of businesses in New Zealand, it's a good feature and a bad feature. I think a lot of businesses and directors have a view that, she'll be right, and they'll still do business on a handshake. And a lot of that during the GFC was causing businesses a huge amount of distress because they weren't able to recover as quickly and as efficiently as they wanted to. It was making the process more expensive. And so over the last decade or sort of 15 years, I think a lot of businesses have taken steps to close those gaps. And I think one of the things that businesses have been much better at is actually getting across their bad debt and actually taking steps a little bit earlier. But I do think that a lot of businesses that we are seeing in distress at the moment are still a little bit too slow off the mark in terms of identifying where there are issues. And they would do themselves a favour if they actually just had processes in place to look into that earlier, work with their financiers a bit earlier, and be more open about any issues that they're seeing. I mean, 99% of our businesses in New Zealand are small to mid-sized, right? And so they take out lending, and a feature of that often is security or mortgages over personal assets, and a lot of the time over their family home, and that can put people in real strife. It would stand businesses in much better stead if those conversations were actually happening. Just understanding actually that a lot of the time the financiers are going to be willing to work with them, and I think you'll in your line of work you probably see that a lot as well when you're getting approached by the banks or even smaller lenders. Often the comment from the financing end is, hey, we just wish they'd come and spoken to us earlier because we could have worked with them, but it's either too late or we have no idea what's happened, and that trust is gone.
Yeah, and I think that's a common theme that I see. By the time people get to me, their mental health has deteriorated because they've been dealing with a huge amount of pressure for a long period of time. So they're making really illogical, irrational decisions. And they do put their head in the sand because they just are struggling to cope with life, with family, with business, trying to find cash to pay staff, feeling that pressure on your shoulders that you are potentially going to let down a team that you've been working with for a long period of time. It's really tough.
It's really, really tough, and more so when it is your own business and you've set it up and you've sort of tried to grow it and you're trying to do the best by everyone. And so they would do themselves a service by actually working with the professionals, whether it's the accountants or insolvency and turnaround practitioners, to put a plan in place, really, to try and work through that period if things are getting tough. You know, the worst thing you can do is to put your head in the sand. But it is hard to get that messaging through to people because it's the easiest thing to do, is just to hope that the problem goes away.
Hope is not a strategy.
Well, it's a reflection, I think, of that she'll be right attitude. I think it really is. And businesses, we've got a much smaller market, and it's difficult for a lot of directors to sort of come to make peace with the fact that actually, you know, maybe it's actually not going to work, or if it's going to work, they need help. And it's a hard lesson for everyone to learn, right? Ask for help when you need it, and make sure you're asking for help from the right people. For goodness sakes, don't go out to a financier who's going to charge you way too much interest if cutting your cost base might be a better strategy. But that's where working with someone who is in that restructuring space can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a couple of the common questions that I get regularly on the weekly basis are what happens if I don't pay the IRD, and will they take my house? And, you know, these directors are very inwards looking, and, you know, they have a south interest, right, in trying to protect their own personal assets.
Yeah, I think that's right. And because of the way financing is often structured, you have security over your house. So often the banks will have taken a mortgage over all of your properties. But you've also got skin in the game because a lot of the time people have given personal guarantees.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to tap back into something you said earlier around the PPSA. So the PPSA is the Personal Property Securities Act, and that effectively allows creditors to place a security interest over an asset, right, that they have an interest in.
Yeah, so the system in New Zealand is really just about giving notice that you've got an interest in a particular asset, and if the rules are followed, you are protected. So if you have advanced funds to acquire an asset, for example, you are going to have priority to that asset if a business falls over. But I think, again, going back to that point about getting help, you know, to make sure you've done things right, or that you don't land yourself in trouble when you don't need to, we still find that a lot of smaller businesses in particular don't understand how that regime works. People can fall foul of the rules under the Act, and it could have been avoided so easily. You know, it gives you priority over the bank, it gives you priority over everyone else who's holding out their hand to be paid. So why would you not get help at the outset? Pay that extra money to get the legal advice and whatever else you need to put the structures in place properly so that you don't fall foul of the rules and then land yourself in a situation at the end where, you know, you've got a whole lot of money thrown away because, you know, you forgot to register a financing statement, or you've done it incorrectly because you thought you could do it yourself. It's going back to that, you know, just get the right help. It's really simple to do.
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples. So I was called by an individual, a business owner, small business owner. He owned a number of pinball machines, and he would put these pinball machines into hospitality establishments around Auckland. And he had already lost a few through some insolvencies because he hadn't registered his interest on the PPSR. And it happened to him again. And the next time he lost more. And, you know, this is just one story of many, but it is a very simple process for these business owners to actually register a security interest over their own assets, because if the business where they are kept goes into liquidation, then they're at risk at losing those assets.
So an example of that is where you've got a asset that the Act specifically requires you to register in a particular way. And so trucks, for example, have to be registered in a specific way, vehicles, VIN or chassis, and if you've done it wrong or if you've missed a number or you've just not done it, you lose your priority. And then you end up fighting the banks or the preferential creditors like the IRD or the employees or whoever it might be for a return when you could have avoided the whole situation to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So another industry that I'm seeing some distress in is around retail. And I've got an example that I want to share with you and just kind of get your thoughts on it. It's a shareholder dispute, but it's also a matrimonial dispute. The husband and wife owned a jewellery business. It did have a store, but the majority of the revenue was generated online. When the relationship completely broke down, the husband owned the Google Gmail account, and so he changed the password to stop them from being able to stop the wife from being able to advertise on through Google. What's your kind of view around matters like that? What practical steps can people take when they've been blocked from online services like that?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one because often the passcodes, etc., are set up at the very beginning of the account being set up, right? And so, you've given me that example, but I had one not too long ago where a lot of the marketing for the business, it was a hospitality business, but a lot of the marketing was done through Instagram and Facebook and social media platforms. And again, it was a password issue. It was held by one person at this organisation who then refused to hand it over. And at that point, it can get really, really challenging because you have to chase this person or whoever it is to get the password released. And actually, it's quite difficult to get the providers to give you the password
because it's in their personal name.
Yeah, that's right. And so and there are privacy issues that come out of that. And so I think my advice, if people are looking at sort of setting up accounts for business use, whether it's an email account or a social media account, is to ensure that there is an account that's set up for the business, so it's not held in anyone's personal name, and that there are multiple people within that organisation that can access that account, and that the password is kept within the business so that it doesn't get lost when you've got an insolvency situation and you've got an employee who has set up the account, for example, who disappears and is upset that they're owed wages and refuses to hand it over and just says, I don't know. And so
I think that's some really good practical advice because we're starting to see that more often now. And I think 10, 15 years ago, there was less kind of online advertising, and now that's kind of ramped up. And where we're going with AI, you really need to just set up your back office around that technology piece.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's about the management being across the technology that's being used for the business, and understanding that there's a need for them to, they may not be the ones that are running the accounts. And I think often the problems arise because you've got someone older, basically, who is in charge or owns the business, and they understand there's a need for marketing or for technology to be used to reach, their customer base. But the temptation is to use someone younger, more tech savvy, more able to run these accounts and run the email address or whatever it might be. And so they leave it to people within the business to deal with it, and they don't pay any attention to what's going on with passwords, tech. And that's where the problems arise because it sits with a person who then controls access.
Exactly. So look, we've spoken about shareholder agreements, we've spoken about protecting yourself around assets. What we haven't spoken about, which is a company's greatest asset but can't be valued on the balance sheet, is its employees. And, I am seeing time and time again employees taking personal grievances against employers because their agreements haven't been documented accurately. So what are you seeing in this space?
An industry that is very near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons is hospitality. And in that space, I think over the years it's gotten a lot better. Employers are much more cognizant now of their obligations to have an actual employment agreement in place and that it's accurate in terms of remuneration, benefits, exit, all of those kind of things. But we are still seeing outfits out there who just don't have an employment agreement. And you talk to the employees and you kind of wonder, well, what did you think you were getting yourself into? You know, if you don't have something signed, what was it you thought you were signing up for? It's important for the public at large to understand that employment dynamic. So employers have to be very aware of their own obligations around employment agreements and making sure that they document those properly and all of those kind of things. Yeah. So employers have to be aware of that, but I think employees have to be responsible for themselves as well, and understand that, you know, if you're not seeing an agreement, ask for it. If you've seen one and it doesn't reflect what you think was agreed, then deal with it at the time. And make sure that you're not leaving it until the company falls over to then have an argument with the liquidator or the receiver, or whoever it might be controlling the business at that end of the story, to try and fix all of those problems, because it's often too late by that point.
It is too late. And I had a call yesterday from an employee of one of my liquidations. He's owed $10,000. He went through the Employment Relations Tribunal. He got a judgment. He was on a payment plan for $500 a week. And then the business fell over. And he's like, well, where's my money? I haven't been paid.
Yep, and your only answer to that is, well, you need to stand in line with everyone else. So we can't do much with it. And
it's such a sad story that I hear all the time.
Yeah, it's really awful for employees. But I think if everyone takes responsibility for themselves, you know, hold yourself accountable for making sure that you've got as much protection as you can, that's a good start. It's a really sad story because employees are the most important asset in most businesses in New Zealand, and they are often the ones that suffer at the very end because they're the ones that are left without holiday pay or wages are outstanding, or, you know, whatever it is that's still owing to them. You know, it's about the employment agreement and people understanding the function of that in that relationship, that they're making sure that those things are as watertight as possible and that they exist.
So something else I'm seeing quite a lot of over the last few years, you might be familiar with it, Phoenix companies. So, let me give you a couple of examples. Construction business, they were loss-making. Then they went and set up a new company, similar name, so met the provisions in the Companies Act to falling under a Phoenix company, did that again, so on and so forth, burnt creditors, burnt employees, continued trading. What's your view on the current provisions in the Companies Act around stopping these serial offenders from continuing to carry on trading businesses like this?
Phoenix companies are a really challenging aspect of the business because the provisions under the Companies Act are unsatisfactory in the sense that they allow for debt to be sort of picked up by, you know, the new company that's set up and to make sure that those creditors are protected. And the whole point of it was to stop creditors from being confused about who they are dealing with. But it's a really challenging situation when, if your question is about, well, what do we do with these serial offenders and how do we actually bring them to account, it can be really difficult because ultimately I'm not sure that they particularly care that they're burning off creditors going from company to company because, you know, if they did, they wouldn't have done it in the first place. But the means of prevention, I think, at the other end sit with our regulatory bodies and like so many of the problems that we see in that space, some of it just comes from a lack of resourcing. I mean, they're not able to actually effectively exercise those enforcement mechanisms because the only way to really do them is to spend some more money trying to, bring people to account, ban directors, whatever the case might be. And it's a really challenging dynamic, I think, for the whole business sector because it is happening. And I think construction was one of the spaces where it was happening a lot. And I'm not sure that it's been as effective as people wanted it to be.
No, I mean, I think we need more change to be able to extend the law to not just cover a business with a similar name, but a business with a similar name and or nature. Because when you have business A closing down and operating as business B, doing exactly the same thing, completely different name, they completely fall short of the Phoenix provisions.
Yeah, and I think that there's always that delicate balance, right, of allowing businesses to do what they do, which is to go out there and it's to sort of promote economic activity and to do their own thing and to have the directors, setting up these new businesses because it drives the economy.
Exactly, and I'm a massive proponent for growth, right? Like, massive proponent. What I'm not a massive fan of is creditors, mum and dad businesses getting burned.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that at the moment is that there are provisions that allow for the banning of directors so that they can no longer go out there and continue to do this. But there's always loopholes, right? And so I'm sure you would have seen it. You then get a sister, a brother, some other friend fronting the business. And it's really, really difficult to enforce because without hard evidence that someone is behind the scenes pulling the strings, you can't prevent someone from working. And so it's finding that balance between allowing people to progress their lives, continue with trade, help the economy, build business, do all of these good things, but actually making sure that they are not just leaving creditors in the dust because things fall over and repeatedly doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing I would like to touch on is there have been a number of businesses that have racked up IRD debt. Have you been working with clients around this, and what kind of practical steps can you kind of share with other business owners that they could take to assist them with the IRD?
Well, I think that there's that famous saying, right, two things are certain, death and taxes. So there's no real way of just dodging the tax man. So your best shot, I think, is to engage if you are behind in your tax obligations. And if you are working out payment proposals, again, the trust in that relationship is key. So if you say you're going to do something, then do it. But be realistic about it. And that goes back to making sure you've got the right people in your team to work out a realistic plan, because don't go in promising the world if you're not going to be able to deliver, because actually that is often where the rubber hits the road, whether it's the IRD or the bank, it doesn't matter. It's people not being terribly realistic with what they can in fact do with their cash flow. And I think, going back to the start, having the right people on your team to help you with that process is key.
It's a real problem, and I think a lot of these SME businesses, they're so busy on the tools, they're so busy just trying to win the work, do the work, that their back office is not set up appropriately to be able to manage cash flow. And during the good times, right, it's okay. But when we're in these uncertain times and cash is a lot tighter, margins are tighter, you need to put a renewed focus on your finance function.
I think that's right on the money, because it's the lifeblood of your business, right? So if you don't have a handle on what's coming in and what's going out, you've got some real problems. And that leads to sort of an inability to assess your business in a holistic way in terms of working out whether or not it's actually viable. Make sure you have a handle on your costs. It's not always going to be the best strategy, but understanding what your cost base is really, really important. It affects your cash flow. It's important because if there's a way of actually reducing that cost base, it's going to help your business. And it doesn't mean, cutting your employees. It can be really simple things, which is a simple function of sort of tightening your belts. And that is often enough to sort of see a business through a bit of a blip. And so those are the pieces that all hang together off each other. One feeds into the other. And if you don't have the right people, it all falls apart.
Well, thank you so much. That's really useful information for our audience and really appreciate you coming in today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoy the Fix and Fly podcast, make sure you like, comment and subscribe and share with anyone you think will find this useful. We look forward to seeing you next time.